Hi, Brian. Looks like I'm the only
Hello.
one here.
I
Yeah.
just turned the meeting on, so I think people might not have been able to join.
Oh, okay. Hi, John.
Hi, Hannah Banana.
Cool. I'm gonna hang out here for 1 minute and give people a chance to join.
Okay.
Cool. So got about 5 people in here. I'd love to do like just a real quick, like get a sense of what everybody's questions at, or yeah, what you all would like help on, just so I can do this as efficiently as possible. So Hannah, can you go first?
Yeah, sure. I was actually just we didn't have time to go through the end of it and like got a little confused on it because it wasn't giving me the feedback that I wanted it to, and we just kind of skipped ahead and like put the idea in ourselves. So we kind of messed it up, and I was wondering if anyone else wanted to kind of like maybe go through it again with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, does anyone else want to like go over anything from the, like, you're talking about the the last activity that we did today?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, let's use the participants thing. Can I get a check mark? Does anyone else have anything that they want to like look at in terms of the activity we did this morning? Hannah, can you give me a green check mark just so I know that we know what it is? Okay. Okay. I think we're good. Let's go to Taylor. Taylor, what do you have a question on?
I had a question just regarding Activerecord, and I was going through the obstacle course and had just a few questions about that.
Cool. Anyone else? Does anyone else have questions regarding the obstacle course? We've got one from John. Cool. Cool. And then Jesse, what are you up to?
I really just had a question about Heroku and specifically if a proc file is required.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's a pretty quick one. I will say that no, a proc file is not required.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. Cheryl.
At this point, should I know what a proc file is?
No.
Okay, I was like, I've never heard of that. I had just jotted down some notes as you were talking, and I got a little confused when I went back to look over them, because I was talking about, like, you were mentioning each time it runs, it queries a database again when you're doing Activerecord commands. And then I wrote instances of model class, but I didn't write down the context of what that means. Does that have enough context that you know what that means?
Yeah, I think so. That gives me a good sense. Will, can you go next? It looks like we got a pretty good amount of people here now too. Okay, so I think I'd like to go ahead and start answering some of these questions. So Hannah, I'm gonna start with you. Yeah, so you said I think you said you had a couple of things from this morning. So can you pick one of them? And we'll start there.
Yeah, so maybe I was just wondering if anyone else like in the group wanted to like go through it again with me. I didn't have any specific questions, so we can just wait till the end, and if anybody wants to jump in a breakout room and just like go over it with me, or if they were interested, that would be cool. So
gotcha. John, is that volunteering?
Yes, and also kind of a general question about what we covered this morning,
Hmm.
if I
Yeah.
may ask.
Go ahead and ask.
Oh, okay. So when we were doing some of them, I think specifically might have been number 7 or 8. I'm not sure. I I didn't get any feedback, as in nothing changed in the table in my posticle, my elephant thing, and I didn't get anything really in the terminal itself. So how do we know for things like that whether it actually worked or not?
Hmm. Yeah, and this sounds like kind of similar to what Hannah was saying. Like, I'm not sure if I got the feedback that I was looking for. Does that sound right, Hannah?
Yeah.
I see Cheryl nodding. Okay, so why don't we do this? John, can you share your screen, and can you go to that number 7 and show us what's going on? We can talk about it as a group. And then what was number 7? So number 7 says, in the Rails console, run task.destroy. Now check your task table and post a code. Did it change? Is this what you expected? Okay.
Yeah, and then when I did do task.destroy, nothing really changed. So I wasn't sure if I did it or if it worked or if I maybe it did destroy it now.
Yeah, so one thing to notice is if you go back down, I'm gonna draw on your screen here. Notice how in between this begin and commit thing, we don't really see anything. Normally what would happen, and so this kind of answers your question about like feedback. Normally what would happen is if we are executing an Activerecord command and it's going to have some sort of effect on our database, we're going to see the SQL query that's generated. But notice how we don't see anything here. And what that's telling me is that it doesn't know the thing that it's supposed to delete. So can you type task in your just task in your IRB session and hit enter? Yeah, so what's going on here is you have a Ruby object here. You have a Ruby object, but it's not reflected in your database. So if you run task.save from the command line, oh, and now we get begin rollback. So this here, so I think when you all say like, I'm not sure if I'm getting the feedback, what I'm expecting for feedback is to look at the Rails console and see like what SQL is being output. So this is telling me that it's not successful. And then can you do task.save and put an exclamation mark on as well? Yeah. So what this exclamation mark will do, this is another way that you can get feedback. I think all the Activerecord commands that we went over earlier this morning, like create and update and I don't know if .all would do them, but if you throw in this exclamation mark, a lot of times it'll give you more information. And so this one, it's not very helpful, but it just says failed to save the record. And I think what's going on here, John, is because you like created it and then delete it, when you try to save it again, it's not really like, it's saying like we already used that ID of 7 doesn't work for us. So let's actually try this in the command line. Let's say task equals, and let's say capital T task.create. And so let's give it a title. So you're going to do parenthesis. That will work too. Yep, title colon. Title. I don't know. It doesn't matter. You could just hammer on the keyboard. Yep, cook, comma, and then description. Make food. Yep, perfect. Nice. So go ahead and hit that. And so now we can see the feedback of here. I can see a SQL query where it says insert into task, blah, blah, blah. So this is telling me that it executed that SQL query against the database to create my new task. So up here, if you click your refresh button, let's see if we see our meal prep task there. And sure enough, there it is. So now let's do in the terminal, let's do task.destroy. And now we can see, compare and contrast this from before. Now I can see in between this begin and commit, I can see this delete from tasks SQL query right there. So that was the feedback that I was looking for. And now if we go up to our post to co, if we refresh again, we should see our cook task now disappear.
Okay, so as long as we get some type of SQL equivalent of what we did, that means that something should have happened.
Yeah, and I will say not just like some type. I do want you to look at the query and see if it looks like you would expect it to look. Now, in Mod 2 and really throughout Turing, we do not expect you to be masters of SQL. So what that means is like, I don't expect you to be able to read and write these queries without any reference. But if you look at the query, you can kind of tell what's going on. Like I see delete from tasks, that is confirming to me, yeah, that's probably deleting the task just like I wanted. When I see insert into task, yeah, I can know just by like instinct or just by like, what's the word that I'm looking here? My context clues that this is probably creating a task like I would want.
Interesting. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
As we write more advanced active record queries, this the SQL is going to get harder to like really deduce what's going on. But for now, we can usually tell what's going on just by the query. Does anyone have any like follow-up or any like questions around the same task? If you do, just go ahead and unmute.
I did regarding, I was still a little unclear on the differences between new and create, and we talk about that again.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. George?
Could I interject really quick? Sorry, Taylor, to sort of think, but I was trying to, I was looking at a thing, and could you go over a little bit more destroy versus delete? And like the question that I wrote down for you was like, how does it know which one I want to destroy? Like, could I destroy like the entire thing? Is it just a row that I can do? I tried to put in parameters in my destroy and also my delete. And of course it didn't like that because it doesn't want any parameters or arguments. So, and then I read about like deleting is not taking the other things into consideration. I don't know, maybe this is going in too deep, but since you were talking about destroy.
Gotcha. Okay, so first of all, the confusion between destroy and delete, like that is kind of widespread throughout this like web applications. We often use the words interchangeably, but also a lot of times there is an incorrect usage. So Tim talked yesterday about HTTP verbs. In terms of HTTP verbs, delete is the verb. When we talk about our CRUD actions, our create, read, and update, the D stands for destroy, not delete. When we're using our active record methods, the built-in active record method is destroy. As John just showed us, he did, I'm gonna highlight here, task.destroy in his IRB session there. So destroy is the method, is the active record method we want to use. There's another question in there, George, I think about like, how does it know which one to destroy? Notice how in John's terminal here, he called this method. So you know from mod 1, your methods run on objects. You have to call your methods on an object. In this case, John called .destroy on this specific task object. So because we called it on that task object, that's the task that we wanted to destroy. Now, you can also destroy all of your tasks at once, but because that's something that you don't want to do to one specific instance of task, you want to do to all the tasks, now we're going to use a class method. So John, in your terminal, can you type capital T task dot destroy underscore all? Yep.
Really?
Yep.
Okay, I'm doing it.
Do it.
Sorry, buddy.
Ah.
Okay,
Ooh.
so notice how it went through and it did a delete for each one of our tasks here. So now if we open up the post-to-code database, what do we expect to see?
Oh, nothing.
Empty.
Yeah,
No.
so now it's empty, right? So again, we called this on the capital T task class because we wanted to do it for all of the tasks. If you want to delete a single task, you would call it on a task instance.
Okay. All right, cool. In class today, somehow when I did destroy, it destroyed my whole thing. I didn't do an underscore, but somehow all of my things got destroyed. So I was kind of confused on that. And thanks for the delete too. Yeah, it was in this blog post that I was reading, and it looks like delete is another active record method, but I probably shouldn't be using that. I should be using destroy. That's what the app, the blog said anyway.
I would say for now, like use destroy. And then if you want to later research delete, I'm actually not 100% clear on the differences. I would just recommend stay with destroy.
Dependencies. I wrote it all down, but it has something to do with dependencies, which of course doesn't really make very much sense to me.
Yes, that's okay. For now, we'll just stick with destroy. I'm sorry, John, your tasks, I know you were using this app to track all of your tasks that you need to do, and I just deleted it all, but you're gonna have to find something else now. All right. Let's go to Taylor's question. John, I'm gonna, can you stop your screen sharing? And Taylor, could you screen share? And let's go ahead and walk through the new versus create thing together. I think this is a good one for us to all see. Cool. And so we're looking at number 4 there in the Rails console activity. Yeah. By the way, I did update this lesson plan just with some of the feedback that y'all gave. And so if you refresh this, the Rails console activity might change slightly. But I don't think it will affect this one. Cool, so we're jumping into our Rails console. And so let's go ahead and copy and paste that task.new line from the lesson plan. Okay, so Taylor, what ID do you see for that task that's created?
Looks like nil.
Yeah, it's nil. So when you see, well, I'll ask you, if you see a nil for an ID, what does that kind of like indicate to you about this data?
That it's nothing, like it doesn't have an ID that will respond to any sort of method.
Yeah, so it doesn't have an ID, and if something doesn't have an ID, like can it exist in our database?
Not if it's the primary key, I guess.
No, and in our Rails by default, our primary key is always going to be called ID. So okay. the long and short of it is, if you see ID of nil, that means that this thing is not saved in the database. Let's confirm that by opening up Postico and check if we see our grocery shopping need to eat record in there. And I don't see it in there. So I think we're good. Okay, so what's the next part of the activity? So it said, let's see now. Open up your task table in Postico. Do you see your new task? In the Rails console, run task.save. Now what ID do you see? So let's go ahead and run task.save. And before you do that, Taylor, actually, so notice, just type task. And I just really want to like emphasize this from mod 1, that this task is a task object. Just like in mod 1, it is an instance of the task class. It is a task object. We can call methods on this object. So this task is an object just like in mod 1 with some special sauce on top of it. The special sauce is it works with Activerecord, which connects it to a database. So it's just like mod 1, except we're layering on the database. So one of our instance methods that we can call, well, you just did one in the terminal there, you did .class, that's going to show us our task class. Another instance method we have is .save. So when we call .save, this should actually try to save this in the database. So I said this before, but one of the pieces of feedback we're going to get from our IRB session here is we're going to see the SQL queries. Notice how up to this point, we didn't see any SQL queries. So what that's telling me is that .new doesn't actually affect the database at all. It creates a Ruby object, but it hasn't done anything to the database. When I run .save, or when Taylor runs .save here, now we can see it executing the SQL to insert this new task into our database. And now, Taylor, what ID do you see for your task? Yep, so you would need to type task in again, and now we can see an actual ID for it. And now we can also call task.id. So if we jump over to the database or our post-to-co, we should now see it stored in the database with ID 21. So we hit refresh, and there it is. There's our new thing. And can you go back to the lesson plan? Is there anything else in there? Do you see it stored? What's the difference between new and create? So can I hear from one of you all, what's the difference between new and create? Go ahead and unmute if you got it.
I can go. I feel like the difference is that create is .new and .save together, and that .new creates the Ruby object, but doesn't. Oh, I'm gonna get this wrong. Doesn't save it in our database. In our database, and so because of that. It's not frozen. I don't know, but essentially create does the job of .new and .save.
Yeah, that was great. Create does .new and .save. .new creates the Ruby object. .save saves the Ruby object's data into the database.
Question about that.
Mm-hmm.
So is .new coming from our application record and .create coming from Activerecord, or like where are we getting the .new to be able to call on the object or the class?
Yeah. So first of all, let's go. Taylor, could you open up Task Manager in Atom or whatever your code editor is? And let's go ahead and open up our task model. We're not going to talk about controllers for now. And let's also open up the application record. Could you split the screen between the two? Yeah, perfect. Okay. So what's going on here is our task inherits from application record, and then application record inherits from Activerecord base. So we have an inheritance tree where at the top of the inheritance tree, we have active, I'll say ARB for Activerecord base. And then we have application record. I know this is some great mouse drawing, application record. And then we have our model, in this case, our task inheriting from that. So application record inherits from Activerecord base, Activerecord, or our models inherit from Activerecord. So we can see that our models inherit Activerecord base through our application record. I know that's kind of a crappy drawing, but that's essentially what it is. So really, in this case right now, because we just have this application record class is empty, it does have this self.abstract class true thing, but that doesn't actually do anything. This empty file really doesn't do anything for us. So Garrett, when you say like we get this from application record, because there's nothing in this application record class, we actually don't get anything from application record. So at this point in the mod, application record doesn't do anything. And so that's why I'm gonna ask you over what I said in class when I said like, I'll answer that next week. I want you to to think for yourself, how could you use this application record? What is a use case for this application record file? Based on what you know about inheritance, or maybe you can look up some more about inheritance, how could that be helpful to have a two-step inheritance chain rather than just directly inherit from active record base? Taylor, could you change this inherit from application record to inherit from active record base? Active record : yeah, there you go. So we could do this. We could just inherit directly from active record base, but we don't necessarily want to for reasons. The answer to that question is the answer to my previous question is the answer to this question. If you can figure out why it would be helpful to have this third class here, that would answer the question of why we would just go directly to inheriting from active record base. Okay, that was a long-winded way of talking about like the inheritance chain. Garrett, I want to talk about the next part of your question, which was where do we get the ability to do .new? Well, where was the first time when you saw .new?
I mean, I think it was when we were defining the methods within the task controller, like we did task equals task.new, for example.
But before that, way before that, like where's the first time you as a programmer experienced .new?
Oh, it was when I guess I was learning about classes for the first time, and we were talking about like def initialize, and then I wanted to create a new class, and so I think that's when the first time I saw it was.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. So .new is nothing Rails specific. .new is a Ruby thing. This is the same .new method that you know from mod 1. It works the exact same way. When George said before, .new creates the Ruby object and .save saves it to the database. Well, that .new creates the Ruby object. That's not new. That is the same as in mod 1. New creates the Ruby object. And then there was another part of that question. Where do we get something else from? Was it .create? Yeah, so .create is a method that we get from active record. And a way that we can, or one of the clues that we get to that is when we run .create from our IRB session here. Taylor doesn't have it up now, but when you run .create, you can see it executing SQL under the hood, just like this .save. So anything that executes SQL and affects the database, that's going to be an active record method. Any other like follow-up questions there?
I had a question sort of related to that. Why would you, in what like case would you be creating a new object that you don't want to add immediately to the table, like with no ID?
George, were you raising your hand to answer? Go for it.
Maybe it was in the same, I was about to go look for that. I saved it so I can drop it in the channel, but it was talking about like maybe in a creation of a form, like you wanted to initialize and you didn't want, and it wasn't filled in, like the user didn't fill it in all the way or something. And so you would want to create a new instance of that, but you wouldn't want to save it yet until it was fully done. I don't know. I'm really sorry. That's a really bad answer, but I just read about it, so I'll drop that blog.
Yeah, you're on the right track. So kind of what you're describing, George, of like if someone doesn't fill in a form correctly or they do something wrong, that's what we might refer to as the SAD path. And so we're gonna talk about that next week, actually. So happy path is like users use our application just fine and everything works great and no one makes any mistakes. But as we know, users make mistakes. And so our application might need to deal with that. I'm gonna try to do something and we'll see if this works. Taylor, I'm gonna try and take over your screen. I just requested remote control. Yes, I think you're gonna have to do open system preferences. Yeah, accessibility. Yep, click the lock. You got it. Yep. Go back to where you were for privacy and scroll down in that where it lists all those apps where you see Discord and Rectangle. Go ahead and find Zoom. Yep. And now click your lock again. Oh, Taylor, what have you done? All right. No, I can't. Oh, there we go. Okay. So you can imagine something like, so right here where we're creating a task and then we're saving the task. So based on what we just learned, that new and that create is a combination of new and save, I could just change this to create, right? And take out this line. But what if I wanted to do something like, if I'm going to kind of pseudocode, I'm going to say like if input valid. So I'm kind of imagining I have a method I can call to say, is the input valid? I want to save it, else don't save it and redirect them. So let's say this, if they give me valid input, then I'm gonna save that task and I'm gonna redirect it here. But if they don't give me valid input, I'm not gonna save it and I'm gonna redirect them back to that same form, which I think would be at tasks new. So this is the use case where you wouldn't want to just save automatically. You would first want to check something and then save it only if we met a certain condition. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any follow-up on that?
So is that why you're creating like task equal to that versus just, okay, I think, never mind.
Yeah, yes, I'm saving it to a variable so then I can call methods on it later. All right. Yeah, so Taylor, my Venmo is at Brian Zanti. Just wire me $100 and I'll see about giving you your screen back. All right. Garrett, you have a hand up. I want to let's stick on let's stay with questions based on the like Activerecord today's class. Let's stay there.
Okay. You tell me if this question is too far off the path, then I'm happy to just ignore it. It's kind of on this topic, but it's not specifically what we were just going over. It's about like the relationship between like controllers and views and the viewer, and like basically how does the controller, like once it routes to a particular method in the controller, like how does, for example, update, right? We don't have an update view. It's called like actually what's happening for update is happening in the edit view. Like how does it know that the update should go to like the edit view? Like how do we like how does it know like what views to go to? So I don't know if that's too far off, and I'm happy to just.
Yeah, I don't want to dive too deep into that right now because I think Tim's class tomorrow will help with some of that. Right now in class, we've had two classes so far. We've had how the web works, and then my class today was all about the databases. So we haven't really gotten into the like Rails MVC side of things, but I'll try and give you a brief answer. How does it know what view to go to? Every controller action needs to do two things. It either needs to render a view or it needs to redirect to somewhere else. So if your controller action is not, there's no view associated with it. So the update is a good example. Like there's no like view that's like the updated view. Typically what we do, rather than showing like a separate view for update, is we redirect to another view that we already have. For instance, a show page. So I'll redirect back to a show page so that someone can see their updates. Destroy is another example. What web page would you show to show that something is destroyed? Well, you wouldn't make like a separate destroy page. You would just make a index page and you would expect to not see whatever it is that you destroyed. So I'll say that one more time. Every single controller action either renders a view or redirects to an existing page. Does anyone have any other like questions from class today, or any of the activities in, or any of the tasks in the activity that you wanted to go over together? Cheryl.
I guess kind of the same thing I said earlier, and I feel like I should be able to put the dots together, but I just still don't understand when you talked about instances of the model class. Like, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So can you share your screen, and we'll do some examples there. And I guess before we get too deep into this, like let's just stick in like mod 1 and imagine like we're just writing like plain old Ruby. What do those words mean when you're talking about plain old Ruby? Oh, Cheryl, you're muted.
I was thinking like instance, I think of instance variable where you can access that in a lot of different places versus just a local variable.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that's a different use of the word instance. So yes, instance variable refers to those like at variables that are inside your class, right? But the instance of a class refers to a concrete implementation of a class. So for example, in mod 1, if you had a person class, if you just write the person class, actually, Cheryl, I'm gonna go ahead and take over. This would probably be easier.
Actually, I think I understand a little bit more now. I was thinking instance variables instead of instance.
Oh, okay, that was the confusion?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So your models are the class. Your models are a class. They are a Ruby class. And when you create new records, you're creating new instances. When you read records from your database, it'll return to you instances of that class. Cool. Taylor.
So going off of that, if I understand it correctly, like a model represents just a single table, so will you only have one instance of that model?
No, a single instance of your model corresponds with a row from your database.
Okay.
Or I could say a record in your database, a single instance. So for example, if I have 10 tasks in my database and I call task.all from the command line, what I would expect to be returned, I'm gonna use all the technical vocabulary here. And what I expect to be returned is an active record relation with 10 instances of my task class.
Okay. So
go for it.
Sorry. So where does that like table object get created, or is it an object, the actual table itself?
Yeah, let me, I'm gonna pull up my slides from today. And I think this diagram should be helpful. Yeah. Can you ask your question one more time, Taylor?
So is the actual table itself an object? And if so, where is that being created? Like when you call, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
The table itself is not an object. The table is I would just say it's a table that's stored within our database over here on the left. So you can very much see it is separate from your Ruby program.
Okay. So
does that answer your question?
Yes, I think I'm just confused as to how the model relates to a table then. Like when you create a task class, how does that get linked to a table in the database that you then create task objects off of?
Yeah. So in this diagram, I can see that the link in between, oh, let me go forward. Don't worry about the labels here, but based on these arrows, I can see that the link between my Ruby program and my database is Activerecord. So let me throw it over to the group. How do we link our models to Activerecord? What is it about that model? What is it about that class that makes it a model, that makes it related to Activerecord?
It's inheriting from Activerecord.
It's inheriting from Activerecord, right? Let me, sorry. How much did you all talk about inheritance in Mod 1?
A little bit, but I wouldn't say like it was I think we had one class on it, and then we had like 2 projects where we kind of had the option to use it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So it's not heavily emphasized. That's I think that's always been that way. So the answer, Taylor, is through inheritance. Because we inherit from application record and our application record inherits from Activerecord base, this is the key right here. We need to at some point inherit from Activerecord base, and that is going to be our connection to Activerecord.
I see. Okay. So then could you, I guess going off of the inheritance, could you alter how tables are being created in the application record? And is there like a reason you would want to do that? I guess I'm just trying to think of the kind of how we were talking about the purpose of the application record class.
Yeah, I think I've said it a couple times. Like, I want you all to think about it. I'm curious at this point, does anyone have an idea of like why do we have this third class? Like, what this just is making things more complicated. What could we possibly do with this?
Maybe like so like Activerecord is like seems pretty broad in terms of like what it can be, what what stuff can inherit from it. So maybe having like application record be empty and sort of open to like us basically creating new methods in it gives us like more flexibility and more like specificness for our like specific classes and what they want to inherit, without having to like make Activerecord super bloated with like all the potential things that one might want to have a class inherit that's maybe not as general as what Activerecord would want to have in it.
I think you're on the right track. And another thing I want you to think about is drying up our code, not repeating ourselves. So how could this, I think you're getting on that line, but like, how could this class help us dry up our code? I saw an SAB2 hand up. Did that question get answered?
Yeah, that was me.
Is that Will?
Yeah, I don't have an answer. Sorry.
Oh, there you are. Okay, cool. Jesse.
So I'm just thinking if we had multiple models that have similar behavior, maybe we could house that similar behavior in application record where these models inherit from.
Yeah, that's right. Can you think of an example that's something that all of our models would want to do?
I mean, I'm trying to think of something outside of what we have available through Activerecord already. I guess nothing's coming to mind.
Let's hear from Kate. You got your hand up.
So I just spent a little bit of time outlining the adopt don't shop thing, and just to give a little bit of a preview, if that's okay, we're gonna have a couple models, one for shelters and one for pets, from what I can figure out so far, and they're both gonna have update, for example. Now they might update different things. They're also all gonna have delete. So I assume with a lot of the same sort of actions on those that we're gonna have the same methods in each one that might kind of follow the same thing, and we'd put them in application record, just like y'all have been kind of leading to.
I think you're on the right track with those specific examples. The built-in like update command is gonna be enough for us, or like the built-in destroy, but there might be some other methods that aren't built in that you might want to do across both of them. But yeah, you're on the right track, Kate. Let me ask you all this. This is something that we haven't done, and I was planning on doing a little bit later, but let's just see how this goes. So I have this task class, and based from mod 1, I know that like I can make methods in a class. So what if I did something like this, def greet, and let's just say okay, so I've done this. If I now go into my Rails console down here, so because I've defined this method as just like def greeting, this is an instance method. So I should be able to call this on a task instance. So let me do task.first, for example, and that will give me a task instance. So let's save that as a variable. So I'll say task equals task.first. So now I've got a task instance. Now I should be able to call my method, and there it is. And the title of my task is actually hello, which is kind of confusing there. And I'll just leave it there. So I think though, like where I want you to be towards like the end of this week is like really starting to make those connections between everything that you learned in mod 1 and how we can apply it here in this like realm of databases in mod 2. What other questions do y'all have? And we can just open it up to any questions at all. Doesn't have to be on from class this morning. Garrett.
Yeah, so this is just in general. So it seems like there's obviously a number of methods that are going to be built into Activerecord that we're going to kind of be able to apply without having to create new methods. Would you say it's like would it be helpful for us, you think, to like go and kind of find an overview of all of those methods so we kind of know what they are and we don't start like duplicating potentially built-in methods? Or like is new, find, save, update, like are those kind of like, is that base kind of enough where we don't necessarily need to be going out and trying to find like a whole like list of them?
Yeah, I think so in class today, I really wanted to give you that kind of like starter list. So everything that you did in that activity, that should be most of what you need for this first project. Now, as far as like a comprehensive list goes, I would recommend, let me actually find this and I can drop it in the chat. So there's a Rails guide that is very helpful. And in general, I want to push you all towards like using the Rails guides as much as possible. And I want to make sure I'm on the right version. Why can I not? Here it is. Okay, so I'm going to drop this in here, and I can go ahead and share and just kind of like look at it together. But this Rails guide is called the Activerecord Query Interface. And something that you didn't see me do, I'm going to redo this because I do want you to see me do this. So I'm on this Rails guides website, but notice how it's defaulted to Rails 6. So we're on 5.2. So you always want to make sure that you're looking at the appropriate documentation. So I'm going to click on Guides Index and go to 5.2 here. And then this is gonna take me to like, this page is the like release notes page. But if I just click on home here, this is gonna give me all of my Rails 5.2 guides. So it's got like Activerecord basics, Activerecord migrations, Activerecord validations. It got a bunch of stuff. The one I'm interested in is query interface. And this one is going to cover a lot of what you're going to need. So retrieving an object from the database. Today, we showed you .find for finding a single record by an ID, but there's also take, which I don't really use very often. .first is one that I just use, which is helpful if you just want a record. So I just said .first because I just want any old task. .last, similar, except it's going to grab the last one. Find by. So here's one that you might need pretty soon on, where rather than finding by an ID, this is going to help us find by a different attribute. So in this example, we're finding a client by their first name. So Garrett, I would say like you don't need to like go find a comprehensive list of all of the Activerecord methods, but if you are interested in just getting more familiar with Activerecord, this is where I would start. Let's go to Taylor.
We can wait till the end if you want, or if you wanted to talk about it now, but I guess my original question was about some of the stuff on the Activerecord obstacle course.
Yeah, let me save that. Let me save that for the end here. Let's go to Hannah.
Okay, yeah, real quick. So from class today, we were doing that task.all on the task class, but the task class is just one record, right? Is that correct?
Not quite. The task class itself is more representative of the task table. So think of the class itself as corollary to the table, and an instance of the class is corollary to a single record or row in the table.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, this is similar to inheritance. This is probably a topic that you started talking about at the end of Mod 1, and now it becomes much more important, class versus instance methods. So class is the class methods we're going to run on our class. So for instance, task.all, because I'm running this on capital T task, this is a class method. So this is not specific to like a specific task. This is just for all of the tasks, I want to see all of them, or for all of the tasks, I want to destroy all of them, or for all the tasks, I just want to get the first one. Versus an instance method like .destroy, I want to destroy a single task, or .save, I want to save a single task. Jake.
So I had a question about, or a couple questions about just the project kind of setting everything up. I noticed Curtis had asked about the turbo links and Spring. If I've already created mine with that, can I just delete them from the gem file?
Maybe. I'm not sure exactly how to disable it. I would Google it if I really wanted to disable it. I would say that you're probably okay if you didn't skip Spring or skip turbo links. But if you run into like any like weird scenarios where something is not behaving as expected, that might cause an issue. So if you want to disable them, I would say like you probably need to take them out of the gem file, but I would also Google to make sure that there's nothing else you need to do. For example, there's a gem called Bootsnap that I have enabled and disabled before, and I do have to take that out of the gem file, but I also have to take that out of boot.rb in my config boot.rb. So that's just an example of something where it's not quite as easy as just taking out the gem file.
Okay. And then the second one, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and ask your next question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, as far as like Git workflow and committing, how, I know it's not graded, but as far as best practice, how, I guess, small of a chunk do we want to be committing? So like what I did last night was I created the index in like the route, the controller, and then in an HTML. Is that too much to do on one commit?
I think that's probably appropriate. I would say
Okay.
like try to keep your commits in small atomic chunks of functionality. So when I say functionality, that means working code. So if in Rails, a lot of times to get something working, we need to create a route, a controller, a view, all of that. So yes, I would commit all of those together as one single chunk of functionality.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, doesn't have to be like one file at a time. George.
Yeah, I was going to have some questions about that Ruby or the Rails documentation because I was trying to utilize that earlier, and I was noticing perhaps I was just on a wrong version of it, but we had used things like create, and I was finding in my Rails guide that it was like create with, and I was wondering if that was different or those were synonymous, because I was looking through the method because I want to have like what Garrett was asking about, like a working knowledge of some useful methods. And it was not the same as what we had discussed in class. And so perhaps that's just, I was looking at the wrong guide index. Do you think?
Yeah, that's potential. Okay. If you ran into create with, I don't think I've ever, I don't think that's necessarily a version thing.
Okay. It was just in the list. And so like, I was like, oh gosh, I'm going to have to, I put that down in my question, like, my goodness, is this something that I just didn't know? Anyways, so it was in my like discovery of like destroy and delete. And so I looked at the Rails guide first. But that was only one of my questions. I just kind of want a little clarification on like SQL. Like we did some SQL work in our intermission, and it looks like our SQL language is, you know, in response to our active record methods and things like that. So are we just trying to get our head around some SQL, just have a underneath the hood kind of idea of it? Or will we be using this? Will I be writing SQL queries in this project and or in mod 2?
No, you won't be writing the SQL queries like the raw SQL queries. We're always going to use Activerecord to essentially write the SQL for us. So if you look on our learning goals for the mod, the like writing SQL queries very much falls under that functional understanding, which is the like, I want you to understand it and be able to do it, but I don't expect you to have things memorized. I expect you to have to like look up things, look up syntax, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of where I want you to be at with SQL. And it's for the exact reason that you just said. What you need to understand what's going on under the hood. You need to understand what SQL is capable of doing, but you don't need to be able to do it yourself. Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and answer some of those Activerecord obstacle course questions. I forget who that was. Was that Taylor?
Yeah. So my first question about it was when I'm looking at it and it's saying using Ruby versus basically using a solution that does Activerecord. And I think that I have some different solutions, but I'm also confused because when I look at the documentation, I see that the select method is listed under Activerecord methods. So I'm not sure how that, like the qualifications of what using a Ruby is versus using Activerecord. I'm a little unclear on that.
Gotcha. Can you share your screen?
Yeah.
And show us where you're at?
Yeah.
Dot select is one of the tricky ones because that one is both an active record method and a Ruby method.
Okay.
So that's one of the harder ones.
I'll show you, I guess. Sorry, I don't know if I'm sharing the right screen.
I can see your obstacle course.
Okay, you can. Cool. So yeah, so for this first one, it's saying using Ruby up here with the all in select, but then I'm looking at the documentation over here, and this exact syntax is listed in the active record guides.
So connect. So this example that you've highlighted on the right there, that is actually, if you read what it says, so I'm just going to read from the top. So works in two unique ways. First, takes a block so it can be used just like array select. So this right here is an example of the Ruby array select method. So it says this will build an array of objects from the database for the scope. I don't know what that means. Converting them into an array and iterating through them using array select. So this is saying that this code right here is using your Ruby array select method. Okay. So the second way that you can use it, this is the active record way, modifies the select statement for the query so that only certain fields are retrieved, like this model.select.
Okay.
So the difference is this dot select right here is called on your model versus this one up here is called on your array of Ruby objects that are returned from model.all.
I see. So should I be using the dot select in that way, or is the dot where how I'm using it like in?
You did it correctly.
Okay. Okay. Cool. I was experimenting with find each also, and I guess that probably wasn't the right way to go about it, but that was my initial thing, so I kept it. But yeah, I couldn't really get that working, so that may just be, I don't know if that's like a commonly used one or if I should kind of maybe put that in like a self-exploration area for now.
For find each specifically, I can say that find each works just like find, where it is selecting records based on their ID. So when you just say like .find, it's going to look for a record with that ID that you pass it. And that was in the exploration that we did today. I think find each is very similar, but it can take an array of IDs, so it can find multiple things at once. The way when you're trying to find a record based on some condition, like this example where we want something with an amount of 500 or something like that, the where is the appropriate use case.
Okay. Okay. And I guess my other question was like, if I put in a pry, sorry, and then run it back here. I noticed that like the ID and the user ID increment, like each time I rerun RSpec, and I just wanted to know if that was supposed to be happening or if that was just a product of the testing or how it's set up.
Yeah, so this is related to that one of those first questions in one of your activities, which was why is there a separate test database and why isn't there any test in that test database? So when you are testing something, it tests against a completely separate database. Also, when you are testing, any data that you add to the test database is cleaned up after the test runs. So that means that every time you run your tests, you're creating new test data. So that's why you're seeing those incrementing IDs every time. So every time it creates all the test data, it's going to delete it at the end of the test run. And because those primary keys sequence, there's like an order to them, it always just picks the next one in the order. And I think if it really bothered you, there's like something that you could do to like reset the primary key sequence every time. But to answer your question, like this is the expected behavior, where it increases every time.
Yeah, it didn't bother me. I just thought it was like interesting. And I guess going off the same line, the other interesting thing that I had a question about was why amount was being converted to scientific notation.
Oh yeah, I think that's just an IRB quirk. It's an IRB quirk where certain numbers it displays in scientific notation, but it's the same number. So down there where I see amount is 0.5 E3, what is that? 500?
You can call like 2I and it'll, or oops, I don't know. But yeah, I think it is 500, yeah.
Can you call orders of 500 dot amount?
I think I can call like the first, since it's an array, right?
It's in an array. Yep.
Dot amount.
Yep.
And then I think I can do.
Yeah. I don't have a good answer for you of why it's scientific notation sometimes and others. What happens if you run dot amount dot class? Big decimal. Okay, let's just leave it there.
All right.
This is not worth going down. George?
I was looking at the class in our exercise today. In our tasks, one of the things was big int. Is that similar to big decimal? Like that it's going to be returning more like a scientific way or something that could hold like a really large number? Because I was just curious and I was looking at it and I had seen in some documentation in mod 1 about big int and small int or something. Anyways.
So the big and small thing, no, this is now you're getting into this is right in my wheelhouse. The big and the small thing, that really has to do with like how it's stored underneath the hood. So underneath the hood, all these numbers, well, all data really is stored as zeros and ones. So big and small really refers to how many zeros and ones do we need to represent this number. The bigger the number it is, the more zeros and ones we're going to need. So once we get into like numbers that are like billions and trillions, we're going to need more zeros and ones than a small int is going to give us. The like need to know information for you all, it's not even need to know, but I think what's going on here is I think that these big int and big decimal classes are the old versions of your integer and float classes. So I think this is just old versions of Ruby classes. I don't know why it's using these old versions. Yeah, that's it. Jesse.
I had a quick question going back to the test database. So if I understand you correctly, our test database is always empty unless we're running our tests. Is that right? We're generating that data every time we run our tests?
Correct. So if your test suite takes 2 seconds to run, your database will only have 2 seconds of data in it.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. And we are going to have testing classes. So if you feel like you don't understand the testing of that at this point, that's okay. Yeah, George, I got you. Garrett.
Yeah. So going back to some of the stuff that we've been doing with like the like task manager and just trying to like kind of understand how it's working a little bit more. So when we're looking at like the value, when we're doing like the edit.html.erb view, and we're making like the hidden, the input that has a type hidden so that we can make the value into a patch, is that like having that value as a patch there, is that what then triggers the router to pick the patch router for that particular, like, 'cause I saw like the patch task ID is the same as like get task ID. So obviously like there needs to be a trigger where it's like, okay, it's asking, the request is for a patch, so I'm using this one. Is that value equals patch? Is that what's basically triggering the request to go to the patch router?
Essentially, yes. That's what's happening. Now, a little bit, there is some more stuff that happens in between. So as Tim talked about yesterday, the internet essentially comes to a client, all the internet comes down to a client sending an HTTP request, a server reading it, and then sending an HTTP response. So the like hidden input field in that form makes it so that when we submit that form, anytime you submit a form, it's going to send an HTTP request. When you have that hidden value, it's going to fake that as a patch request instead of a post request. Then when that request arrives at our Rails application, the router is going to determine how to route it based on that verb, that patch or post verb.
Gotcha.
So eventually, yes, that hidden field does make it so that the routes recognizes our patch route and not a post route. But in between there, what actually happens is that it changes what the HTTP request looks like, and it changes how the Rails app receives the HTTP request.
Got it. So it's kind of like tricking the HTML or HTTP into accepting that patch, even though it wouldn't normally accept patch as the method.
Yeah, and if you dig deeper on this, you'll come to find that forms are only supposed to be posts or get, but there are ways, as you're pointing out, to fake it to seem like it's a patch request, even though technically you're not supposed to be able to do that. There's a lot of like weird things in the internet where it's like, yeah, 40 years ago they made it this way, and we kind of just determined that we want it to work differently, so we changed it. Yeah, there's a lot of like rules that we kind of just like follow because they're old and they're there, but then we don't really follow them. So it's weird. All right, y'all. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you all for joining.
Yeah, thanks so much for hosting this.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
And
Thank you,
recording,
Brian.
by the way, that's amazing.
And for recording. Yeah. Garrett and I
Yeah,
really
do you
appreciated
all
that.
want me to post the recording to the playlist?
Yeah,
Yes.
that'd be awesome.
Okay. All right.
That'd be
Thank you so
super lovely. And for those who couldn't join too.
Yep. All right, we'll see you all tomorrow.
All right.
Bye.